Welcome to the Energy Perspectives podcast, brought to you by Energy Dialogues, and we are coming to you from San Diego, California, beautiful San Diego, California, and we're going to have a conversation about CCS and how we can use CCS and deploy CCS as a decarbonization tool, specifically really within the energy sector. And I have two great folks to chat with about all of that today and do some quick intros and get into the conversation.
Thank you, Manteris. I'm Michael Manteris, co-president and co-founder of Blue Sky Infrastructure. We are a Houston-based company developing CCS projects on the Gulf Coast. Started the company in 2020 with another former Cheniere executive, and we are a portfolio company of Blackstone. We have two projects. Our first project is our River Parish sequestration project in Louisiana. That's a hub-style transportation and sequestration project catering to industrial emitters in the Mississippi River Industrial Corridor along the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. We've leased 32,000 acres from private landowners, submitted Class 6 permits for 7 injection wells to inject 14 million tons a year, 400 million tons of total storage, drilled the first stratigraphic test well in the river parishes, submitted the first Class 6 applications that were complete in the river parishes. So that project is fairly advanced from a development perspective. And we have a second project in Alabama, our Timberlands project, that is more focused on a single point source, but involves post-combustion capture from a pulp and paper mill.
Great. It's a lot going on, lots of permits and lots of things I know you'll talk about. But
Brett Kerr with Calpine. Calpine is the largest producer of electricity from natural gas, the largest producer of electricity from geothermal, and we're also the largest cogeneration company in the United States. One of the things that positions us well to directly tackle carbon capture is the idea that we are so diverse geographically and in terms of our customer base. So we were recently selected by DOE for 2 large grants related to a project in California at our Sutter facility and a cogen facility in Texas at our Baytown plant. Combined, those 2 facilities will capture approximately 4 million tons of CO2 a year, which is really great. We're excited about it, and we view it as a way to both address the needs of our customers and the communities where our employees live and work and where our customers are, but also a way to signal to the market that the electric field and how power is generated is changing in this country, not just on a yearly basis, but almost on a monthly basis. The markets are changing.
I love that energy is changing, and where we're sourcing it might seem a little bit traditional, but how we're going to get to these really ambitious climate goals that we're in California, that we have in California, but how that's going to be broadly applicable, and how we're going to leverage local and certainly federal dollars, like you already along your way. So I'm going to do my intro, and I'm Manteris Densmore, and I'm the Director of Engineered and Industrial Solutions at ACR. And what I love about my job is that I get to hear about all kinds of projects, but also provide financial support for projects and through the carbon markets. And so I hear about all these projects, and a lot of them are at different stages, and both of you guys are further along in some of the process. And so we hear all these announcements, we see lots of opportunities to have great conversations, but then we don't really, I'm not getting invited to a lot of ribbon cutting ceremonies, we'll say, right? And so sort of, since you guys are further along in the process, what's the sort of secret sauce on how have you gotten past like some of the early but really important hurdles and further hurdles down the road?
Well, from our perspective, just inevitably in project development, there's always a funnel of project announcements to permit applications, to commercialization, to financing, to execution, to operation, and projects die along the way. So that's inevitable. And when we're talking about federally regulated infrastructure that is quite time consuming and complex to permit, that takes a long time. So there's a lot of fanfare about CCS, and the reality that everyone has to just appreciate is that these are long duration timelines for permitting and then execution. And so we're along that path. I mentioned our Louisiana project. That's fairly well advanced from a development perspective. I mentioned we've drilled a characterization well. We did the first CCS-focused 3D seismic survey in Louisiana. We've submitted permit applications for both the underground injection wells, initially to the EPA, now under review with the Injection and Mining Division in Louisiana, and to the Corps and Office of Coastal Management for our pipeline system. So all those pieces of the puzzle have to fit together. And then on the emitter side, there's air permit considerations, there's long lead item orders for rotating equipment. So all those things have to be sequenced. And the permitting for the underground injection is probably, it is the critical path at this point. It's the newest. Regulators are being very cautious because they want the first few projects that they permit to be successful.
Yes.
And so that's the driving the timelines for our projects, at least.
I think as an industry, we all want the first few projects to be successful. We're definitely
totally.
in make or break with that. But so Louisiana, great. Tell me more about other places. Yes.
So I'll take it a little bit more at a macro level, right? One of the things that we have found for projects of this scope, when you talk about long lead time, relatively new or varying technologies, all of those things, what we try to do is be rigid in the goal that we set, but be very flexible and adaptable in how we accomplish that goal. So, for example, if we say we want to reduce the CO2 footprint of our power generation facilities, well, CCS is a key component, but so is storage, and so is geothermal, and so are all these other things, right? So what allowed us to be successful, to bring it back to the CCS question, is again, looking at this from a truly holistic standpoint, understanding what DOE was looking for through their grant process, spending a lot of time with them to understand, what are their key priorities? As you mentioned, constructability. Is this really going to get built and operate? That was a major one. Community benefit plan was a huge component of this most recent grant. So we wanted to ensure that we were working with our community partners, educating them, addressing their concerns, getting them to support us in our efforts there. And I think that has been hugely beneficial to us as we've been able to go forward, because when you can get support letters, not just from, say, your U.S. Senator, but from your local civic and garden clubs saying, Calpine's done 500 meetings in the community over the past year. They are encouraged by that. They know that we're going to be good stewards and we're going to go out there and communicate, because nobody should think that it's incumbent upon them to single-handedly lead the charge. Like one of the things that we say is one individual company cannot change the market, but they can change minds. And that's what we really are thinking about doing, is letting people understand that, we need reliability of the electric grid, but it can't be business as usual. The energy transition is here whether we like it or not, so how are we going to meet the challenges of keeping reliability at the forefront while also addressing climate change?
I'll echo a point about the DOE grant funding process. We were selected for 2 grants from the Carbon Safe program for our 2 projects, and one thing that applying for those forced us to do was think holistically about all the pieces of the project, probably sooner than we would have otherwise, and being able to articulate to others in a straightforward way how these pieces of the puzzle will fit together, how they'll be sequenced on the community benefits plan, and lining up support. I'm grateful that we had to put those together, because those are already, we're not even really into it yet, and they're already bearing fruit. They've been very well received, and helps us who are new to these communities generate goodwill and generate a little bit of credibility.
Yeah, a little street cred, when you're bringing
exactly.
that.
So I can imagine how much effort was put into developing those FOAs, and they are painful to get through. They're very dense, but it has forced us to think holistically in a way that has benefited us already.
Well, and really the conversation around CCS has shifted, because it was really around technology and feasibility, and now it's okay, we know we can do it, right? But it's the where and it's the who that we really need to start focusing on, and it's all that other stuff that really gets you to FID essentially, because yeah, sure, but we can absolutely pull CO2 out of a waste stream. We can pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, but is someone going to let us do it in their backyard? Is someone going to help us finance these projects? And there's so much opportunity here on the Gulf Coast, and so there's obviously lots of CO2 sources that are along the Gulf Coast and point sources. But I feel strongly the energy industry has some advantages when it comes to project deployment, and I'd love to hear your experience with that and how you've leveraged, just what companies have been doing and your companies have been doing across your value chain to help you get these projects going.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll kind of answer from our perspective on that question, is that we first kind of thought about where do we want to do this? And we thought, first of all, we'd look at where are locations with economically capturable CO2 emissions that are generally overlaying suitable geology for sequestration. Is there constructible, permeable infrastructure? Do you have a supportive regulatory framework and business climate for CCS? Can you put the elements of the project together? And that's where why we focused on the areas we're focusing on. In Louisiana, if we draw a big box around energy companies and include companies that use hydrocarbon feedstocks, that are maybe in the chemical space, in the refining space, in the heavy manufacturing space, the power generation space, there's a lot of people that are pretty far up the learning curve of what it's going to take to put these projects together. So when you go in and talk about CCS, you don't get blank stares backwards. They understand underground wells, they understand pipelines, they understand permitting timelines, they understand investment horizons around infrastructure and financial commitments. And so it just was a natural place to start, so that there was already a basic understanding of the key elements to do that.
Great. No, and again, just in the shift in the conversation too, it was a lot the energy industry is well placed because of knowing about fluid flow in the subsurface and that sort of side. But it's really evolved. The conversation has really evolved into talking more about the softer stuff and the community engagement and experience with deploying large projects, and how do you engage early, often, authentically with the community? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that is something that I don't think can be stressed enough. When you go to a project lender, I mean, building a power plant is a hugely complex, highly capital intensive endeavor. Years of planning, permitting, execution, operations, all of those things. But you're generally dealing with lenders or EPC contractors, other folks who are familiar with that, right? They have a lot of experience, so it doesn't scare them. And the days, and this is certainly Calpine's view, and I know others in the space share this perspective, the days of being able to, file for your air permit, and then maybe you do one public meeting about your project and say, this is what's about to be built here, and we already have our air permit, so, you might sue us or not. Those days are gone. Right, so that's why again, I'll say
for the better.
Let's to be clear,
we do not miss those days.
Right,
okay.
But to be able to now go out and engage with the communities at the front end and say, look, before we got the DOE grants, like I said, we did 500 plus public meetings over the course of 1 year, and we heard from everybody, from folks who were desperate to have us in the community, from folks who were desperate to keep us out of the community. And we address those concerns. We tell them how we're going to mitigate the risk and how we're going to do those other things. And that has inured to the benefit not just of Calpine, but I think to the industry writ large, because what we're seeing is as people get more and more comfortable with this and they understand, they take an interest in it and they do their own independent research. It leads to hard questions, sure, but if we're not prepared to answer those questions, then that's shame on us. Right, so the engagement with the community is critical, because really it's the community, and when I say community, it's a very broad term, right, including whoever might be the residential and small business folks immediately adjacent to the plant, all the way to the community of buyers of energy in the country, right? From the large tech folks all the way down to the petrochems and O&Gs who have their own ESG goals that they have to meet, and we're a solution for them. So it's educating those folks on how we can be a resource as opposed to saying this is what we're doing solely for our own benefit.
Right, and that's helpful because when you're explaining and trying to justify these projects to the folks that ultimately hold the checkbook within your companies, they're looking for metrics on. So it's, yes, success can be defined by, at this stage, like we got the permit, we had enough community support to get a permit, but other metrics for success around community engagement. What does that look like for you guys?
Well, one thing that we think about is like, look, you want to be wanted in your areas of operation, and the infrastructure that we're installing is not intended to be there for months. It's intended to be there for decades, and you need to really start off on the right foot. And so the way we have tried to do this is, before we go out very publicly, tried to introduce ourselves to key stakeholders, to local elected officials, to community leaders. What are we doing? Why is it safe? Who regulates it? Where are we doing it? More importantly, where are we not doing it? And provide some basis of education so that when we do become more public facing, those officials aren't caught off guard by questions from their neighbors and their constituents. And I think that has served us well. And that's a model that we try to use, in all of our projects, because if you don't do it that way, then the misinformation can spread, and then that can generate angst, and it, you can never start off on the right foot. It's too late. It
absolutely does. Yes.
It's too late to start off on the right foot, and you're never going to make every single person a super fan of what you're doing. But at the very least, if you can inform and educate with respect to what you are doing, what you're planning to doing, when you're planning to do it, where you're planning to do it, that can ease a lot of angst. We've had some public meetings we've had to do, and we've had no one show up, and we didn't want that because we wanted some of the neighbors around what we're doing, even if we're not impacting them directly. We want to meet them, and we want them to know what we're doing. And so one thing we did was, last summer in South Louisiana in the summer, it's very hot.
Yes.
We set up, we had one of our landowners let us put an air-conditioned tent on his front lawn, and we personally invited a lot of people around just so that they would come, to get them to come, to meet them face to face. And I remember in that venue I had grand ideas, at least, of how much information we'd be able to convey. And it was a little bit of an education for me as to how little people know. People thought we were injecting CO2 already, and thought we were simultaneously drilling for oil. And so it was an education process both ways, to where you can introduce your project, have that face-to-face interaction, but also learn from the community and kind of appreciate where they're coming from, how new it is to them, and what they're starting from.
Right, that's so important in framing it. Being flexible when you got to your air-conditioned tent on the front lawn, but reframing it as a listening exercise.
Definitely.
And because you're going to come in with your ideas of what you think they want to know, and you'll be wrong.
Yeah.
Let's just say.
So I think to the question of how do you quantify the benefits of community support. And I think there's two different ways that you can do it, right? The first is not just the quantity of the amount of support you get, but the quality of the amount of support, right? Beautiful. Because there are always going to be the chambers of commerce and the economic development outfits that are saying, hey, this is a $1 billion infrastructure project. Absolutely, we want it, right? You're going to pay X in taxes. You're going to create this many number of jobs. 100%, we don't care what you're doing, right? Just spend your money here, right? They like that. But that's not really a quality. I mean, we certainly welcome that. We have, but really what you want is those folks that the most rewarding for me personally are the folks who are against you when you walk into the meeting. Go, this is bad, and why? What are your concerns there? We've mitigated that risk. We've already addressed it. Or no, we don't do that. There's people who think you're drilling these methane wells. It's like, no, this is a power plant that we're capturing flue gas, so I'm not sure where that, but those are great to do it. And the other, which I think is hugely important is using third-party validators and going forward and developing this stuff. So when it's not the individual company going out there, when we go meet with the community, I've never seen an ugly dog, but our dog's the cutest. These are the best projects that you're ever going to get anywhere because they're ours, right? And people know that, so they come to it with a healthy amount of skepticism. But when you can partner with a long-serving, whether it's a local college, some educational outfit or some independent third party to come in there and say, we've looked at their study and independently we have confirmed what they're saying, or we found some slight deviation, but it's not meaningful in any way. Or have you thought about doing this? A lot of times we do this study so we can present it, and like you said before in your discussion with DOE, it kind of forced you to think, oh, we hadn't thought of that. That's a really good idea. And we'll come up with it that way. So third-party validators is also a huge benefit to us.
And partnerships, right?
Partnerships, partnerships generally is a great word.
Right, and if only there was a one-size-fits-all, but it's really who are the movers and shakers in this community? Who's the local educators in this community?
Well, and I can tell you, having a project in the ship channel of Houston and having a project in California, there's definitely a difference in the audience and their concerns. But it's really the same kind of project with the same technology relatively, and we have been very thankful that we have found receptive audiences. And I say receptive, we're not expecting, and I don't think anybody expects to go in there and say, we don't want to hear your opposition. Just we want you to hear our case, and hopefully we'll assuage your concerns, and if not, we want to maintain that discussion. But we know we're not going to be all things to all people, and that's okay.
Local advocates is so important in both of our projects. We don't have operating assets, so we're new to the area, and we've found our landowners have been incredibly important advocates for the projects. They have credibility with their neighbors, they have credibility with local elected officials, they have credibility with community leaders, and having them vouch for us, vouch for the project, be able to talk about the benefits for the community has been immeasurable, because like you said, we can talk about how great the project is as much as we want until the cows come home, but hearing it from someone who has credibility and that some members of the community trust goes a long way. Partners on community benefits, we're doing something similar in Louisiana. We're partnering with the River Parishes Community College in helping them, as part of our community benefits plan, craft curriculum so that students can, their motto is they want their graduates to have family sustaining paychecks, and there's a lot of interest in energy transition careers, and so helping design their curriculum so that their graduates can go for those family sustaining paychecks in energy transition careers is something that has been well received. We're partnering with LSU in setting up a community benefits fund that during operation will allocate some of our storage fees into a fund that will invest in the local communities on an ongoing basis, and LSU is helping us set up an advisory board so that local folks who know what the community need select those initiatives, not us.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We're doing the same thing.
I love it. I'm going to use the word ambassadors because I like the word ambassadors. So you have partnerships, that are a little bit more third party, a little bit more neutral potentially, but then you have your landowners, and certainly they can speak because they're digging in. Like, this is happening on my property, on my land. I want to know what this is about. And when it's outside of the familiar, doing that work ahead of time, and again, really authentically, it's we're not checking boxes when it comes to community engagement.
Yep.
Well, all my questions weren't about community engagement for this chat, but it seems like that's where we landed, because it's just so crucial. Because again, we can do this from a technological standpoint, but we need buy-in at basically every level to really get to ultimately putting CO2 in the ground, which is what we need to be doing. And there's different drivers, there's different folks, there's different communities. I've worked in California, Texas, Louisiana. I've put holes in all of those states, so I can totally confirm everything that's been said. So any last thoughts on just our chat today, and what's it looking like going forward? Let's start.
Well, one thing we didn't talk a lot about was the economics of these projects, and there's a couple drivers, at least for our projects. We're not a technology company. We are a project developer. We're not trying to invent new technology. We're maybe applying existing technology in some novel ways, but this is nothing that hasn't been done before. We're developing infrastructure, and the returns on investment need to be commensurate with infrastructure investment. The 45Q tax credit is, for us, the basic underpinning of what's going to allow us to earn a return on investment. It's a 12-year tax credit, and so we have to think about that, earning a return on investment within 12 years. Our hope and belief is that after the tax credit is expired, that either there's a price on carbon that incentivizes continued use, or maybe there's regulation that allows this infrastructure to continue to be used, because absent that, an emitter can't just independently absorb a giant cost to absorb CO2. So the economics, at least the way we think about it, they have to fit within bankable revenue streams. The 45Q tax credit's one of them. Our Alabama project, it's a post-combustion capture project. Brett knows all about the costs of post-combustion capture. It's not cheap, and candidly, it can't earn an economic return with 45Q alone. And so you have to look at other avenues of how you can either offset and defray the capital costs via federal grants, which are an incredibly helpful and meaningful avenue.
Yes, yes indeed.
And on the revenue side, enhancements either from the voluntary offset market or otherwise to be able to make the return profile attractive.
Well, that's my day job, is the voluntary and compliance carbon markets. That's a whole nother podcast.
For sure. Yeah, I'll take it to a higher level. You used a great line. You said ambassadors, right? So where we say we have a project and we have separate landowners, and we want those landowners to be project ambassadors for our project. Well, I think it's, if you're watching this podcast, certainly you have an interest in carbon capture, energy something, or you wouldn't be tuning in. So I would tell you it's incumbent upon all of us to be energy transition ambassadors. It is incumbent upon us to go out there and educate people that we talk to, whether we're at a dinner party, we're at a luncheon, our coworkers. We tend to be egocentric. We come to these conferences and there's everybody in the room and we're all excited to talk about carbon capture. But I would bet that if you asked 95% of the staff in the venue we're in right now, and you said, well, we're here for a carbon capture event, they'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So let's all own our role as ambassadors for the energy transition and go out there and do that, because when you start that trend, I think then inevitably the money will follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're training the energy ambassadors when we go to events like this, and I mean, most of my neighbors run screaming when I come, because I take my role as energy ambassador very seriously, and CCS.
My friends run for a different reason.
All right.
Well, after that pep talk, I'm ready to go. Let's go.
Let's do it. Yeah. Well, so thank you both so much, and thanks to Energy Dialogues for facilitating, and really just appreciate the conversation about things that we're talking about more, but we need to talk about even more, and really getting out there. This is such important work that you're both doing, and it's really tough to be a first mover on this stuff. So thank you both for what you do in your day jobs, and thanks for the conversation today.
Thank you.